Hey there, I'm Dee Giffin Scott, and welcome to my first episode of my new series. Normally, as a talk show, what I would do is have interviews, and then we do some fun sketches and that sort of thing. But today we're going to be exploring a powerful biographical novel. This particular family, the Bieberstein family, is truly an inspiration, and it is a story that needs to be told. So, freedom fighters at the core, women, children, grandparents, laser-focused Polish resistance, fighters seeking justice and attempting to survive the atrocities of the Holocaust. I mean, I just love this book. It has everything that appeals to me. Right now we're at the home of the Bieberstein family to interview the writers of Not Without a Fight, D.W. Duke and Thomas Beavers. Thank you so much for allowing me into your beautiful home to have this interview. I am so excited to meet both of you. I love, love, love this book.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to help launch your new show.
Oh, thank you.
Right.
That's very nice of you. All right. So, Thomas.
Yes.
I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
All right. Your dad, Cass, said that he had to fight as long as there were Nazis who wanted to kill Jews. At 7 years old, I mean, this is a really profound statement.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me his character was built around a strong upbringing.
Well, they had a very strong upbringing, well before the war.
Mm-hmm.
They come from extreme wealth. They had multiple properties throughout Poland. So he had a strong father, mother, an older brother, uncles, nephews, nieces, cousins. It was a very, very strong family unit, very tight-knit, very well-to-do, very professional. So he already had that mindset of success and what needed to be done to gain whatever he needed to obtain.
Yeah.
So that would carry on into the war years as well.
D.W. Why did you choose August 7th, 1937, while the Bieberstein family was preparing for Shabbat, as the opening to your story?
Well, there were a couple of reasons. One was to lay the foundation for who the Biebersteins were. They were a family that had been Orthodox Jew. They were preparing for Shabbat. They had this conversation that was very important. Cass talked about it frequently. And when I met with him, he described it as approximately 2 years before Germany invaded Poland, on a Friday before Shabbat, and he said it was near the end of the summer. So that's the reason I selected that particular date. But primarily it was to lay the foundation for who the Bieberstein family was.
Great job. Great job.
Thank you.
I really found that to be so enlightening. I got pretty much the whole idea right from the first chapter of what these people were like. So well done. Were you able to glean any insight into why this specific family survived?
Yes, I did. I think there were quite a few reasons. One, of course, was Irina, a very intelligent woman. She had a PhD in chemistry. She planned a lot of activities for the children, what they were going to do. But one of the most important things, I believe, and Tom would probably agree, is that they knew when people said, okay, you're going to go on a train to someplace where you can work. They knew where they were going. And there could be a number of reasons for that. It could be their background, but it also, Cass's grandfather was a major in the Polish army. So they had a lot of insight to what was going on. Cass told me one time that when you corner a human being and you give the human being no choice except death, that human being is going to be one of two things. It's going to cower or it's going to fight. And they chose to fight back.
Thomas, what was an important turning point for your father in the war?
Very good question. Without giving away too much in the book, just a slight teaser I'm going to throw in there. But there's a moment in which he went from an innocent 7-year-old child to a freedom fighter, a rebellious young man, basically. And it's the moment when Oskar Schindler walks into the house, orders them to vacate. He refuses to go. They refuse to go, because my father had his dog and didn't want to leave his dog behind. Oscar Schindler shoots the dog in front of my father. That moment was the turning point, not only in the war for him, but the rest of his life. And no matter how old he became, when I was growing up with him, in the 70s and the 80s, no matter how young he was, middle age, older, that moment is the moment he would share with anybody who wanted to know anything about his experience in the Holocaust.
DW, I can understand how Irina Bieberstein's concept of skillful disobedience kept her family together. How much did this influence the writing of this book?
She was a tremendous influence. And again, I mentioned that she was a very, very intelligent woman. She would try to think of things, and I don't want to give away too much of the book, but I'm going to do just a little bit of a teaser here. She put the kids in places where you would not expect to find Jewish kids. For example, at one time she had Cass living in a brothel, and the women in the brothel were taking care of him. Another time, Cass and Thaddeus were both living in a Catholic church. One of my best images is when they were working in a garage that repaired Nazi trucks, walking around talking to Nazi soldiers, and of course Cass could speak fluent languages. He could speak German and everything else. And no one knew that they were Jewish kids because of that. So they were right there, right in the heart of the concentration, and they were able to pull it off. And I think it was Irina's brilliant way of thinking of doing the opposite of what would be expected.
Yes.
And let me follow up on that. His servants prior to the war were Christian. They were Lutherans. They were Catholics. So he already had a Christian ideology and belief system. He knew how the Catholics spoke. He knew how the Lutherans would their thought process. So for Irina to transit, it was a very easy thing for her to put up as a model. Remember how such and such reacted. Remember Christmas. Remember these things we had in our house prior to the war. That's how you need to act once you're amongst the Germans.
I completely agree. I felt when I read the book, one of the things that was really fantastic was the fact that they were exposed to the Christian religions, and also the Christians were exposed to the Jewish religions, and so they had like a great understanding of each other and a mutual respect, which I thought was fantastic. Thomas, did your dad talk about his views on having to kill?
He would. I know teaser in the book talks about his hunting days and things like that prior to the war. Again, I'm going to go back to that moment with Oscar Schindler. That moment is when he transitioned, I won't say to killer, but he wouldn't kill another animal after that moment. He had a profound love of four-legged creatures. He couldn't kill a rat, a mouse, a hamster, nothing. He couldn't harm them. However, he wouldn't think twice about killing a German.
DW, there's lots of Jewish female freedom fighters in your book.
Yes.
And I want to know, how difficult was it for you to talk and write about their experiences with the Nazis?
In the context of their role as freedom fighters, I would say it wasn't really tremendously difficult. It was powerful. It's like the young women today fighting ISIS, taking up guns and fighting ISIS, often where men are afraid to go. A lot of the women in the book, the young women, they're mostly young, that were fighting were like that. What was difficult for me, and sometimes I would just have to put the book down, is when I would see the way they would treat the women generally. The laws against racial defilement and how they couldn't have sexual relations with a woman. So what they came up with was an idea that, okay, they would do that, but then they would kill them. That way they could not carry on any seed. The way they would use them for target practice at Treblinka.
Yes.
I mean, just crazy things that beyond anything that we can even imagine. This was a world where these guards were told, do what you want. Do whatever you want to these people. It doesn't matter.
What do you think your father was most proud of that he did during the war?
Very good question. Again, like I said, I want to paraphrase. Like I said, he wouldn't kill animals, but he was very, very proud of his militaristic responses to what the Germans had done. Have him tell it, he single-handedly beat Adolf Hitler. You know, so no matter what the situation was, I beat Hitler. I saw him and I did this and I did that. So he was very proud of that. There's a moment where he plotted the demise of a certain soldier that's irritating him. So those things he would very happy with. I mean, he would gleam. And then also his relation with the Soviet army when they came in. He was thrilled when they arrived. A little story. When the Soviets showed up, okay, now he was living on the other side of the ghetto now. So when the Russian front moved into Poland, all of a sudden he's out doing his little patrols or what he was doing, and he hears some tanks rumbling. Right? He sees tanks coming, but he sees the big red star, not the swastika he's used to, but a big red star. And sure enough, it was a Russian tank. So he runs home, you know, to his mother, says, "There's a tank. The Russians are here." And she says, "No, they're not. You're lying." He says, "No, you're not. You're lying. They're not here." He said, "They are." And so he got spanked for lying, you know. So he goes, runs, and gets them. He invites the Russians to come over, and meanwhile this tank is coming through, and mind you, my grandmother, his mother, was very fastidious. She loved her gardens now, okay? So the tank rolls right over her flowers, you know, and instead of saying, "Thank you for liberating us, thank you for coming," "You ruined my flowers." So he was very happy with that. He was very thrilled working with the Soviet Union. So the Russians used him as a spotter to spot the Germans and to work with them. So he became one of them. Another funny story that I'll tell you is he calls it his Purple Heart moment, where he was spotting for the Russians, and the Germans could not figure out wherever they moved, the Russians would launch artillery. And they moved 100 yards west, they get hit. 50 yards to the south, they get hit. Okay? Finally dawned on him, I think my father might have made a mistake. Something happened. There was a tree. There was a glare in from binoculars, something that Germans figured out what was going on. They didn't realize there was a little boy up there, but they realized something. And they launched, I don't know if you know what an 88 is, but these were gigantic cannons, basically. They fired this anti-personnel shell right into the tree, blew it up, tree comes crashing down, my father shatters his head. It's a Purple Heart moment. They rush him into the Soviet hospital, field hospital. They go in there, he's surrounded. He in a way, he's in pain, but he's always gleed about this. Even when he was older, he was so half thrilled, not about his broken hip. He's like, "I'm around all these Russian soldiers. One's got, this guy has no arm over here. This one's bleeding. You know, these soldiers have been torn up on the battlefield." So he gets in there, and all of a sudden, this Russian doctor who's been treating all of these wounded soldiers and these horrific battle wounds was an orthopedic surgeon of all things. And the surgeon was so excited to actually do orthopedics on a child. And so that was a great moment. He talked about that, and of course they told me I couldn't use anesthetic because there was not enough anesthetic. I had to, the soldiers had to get it, and so they just told me to suck it up, and he fixed my hip, and I was good to go. And he talked about I know he talked about DW about that moment too, getting shot out of the tree and shattering his hip, and so the military side of it, working with the Russians, and not that I know Soviets have a bad reputation. They were taught of being anti-Semitic and things of that nature, but the average soldier on the battlefield recognized bravery no matter who carried it out. So my father, being a child and fighting back and resisting, they took that as a sign of courage, a sign of bravery. So whatever the Russians had, they shared with him.
One little background piece there. After Russia had invaded eastern Poland, his grandfather was captured and became an officer in the Russian army. So he used to be a major in the Polish army. He eventually became a colonel in the Russian army, and of course they loved him. So when they knew who Castle was, he was like a favorite guy, you know.
Did your dad give you any insights of what life was like at that time when all this was going on? Like maybe with the Russians?
He didn't talk a whole lot to me. Life prior to the Russians coming wasn't, he didn't want to talk about that as much, because that was more of the ghettos type situation. It was more of the Holocaust, as he called it. Where his resistance came in, when the Russians showed up, that's when he finally had someone to resist with, to fight with him. So when the Russians arrived, that changed everything. He had strength, he had motivation, he was there to persevere, and so that was a really important part when the Soviets arrived.
Yes. Grandma and Grandpa Schnitzer seemed to play a big part in the Biebersteins' life during the war. How did you manage to weave them in so tightly?
Well, I related well to Grandpa Schnitzer because he came from a line of rabbis, and he was an Orthodox Jew. And his library would have consisted of many of the same books that are in my library, Mishnah Torah, Laws of Kings and Their Wars, and all the same books. So I could identify with him very well. He was a dentist, and what he taught, and I think his understanding of what the Holocaust was because of his knowledge, was different than most of the people. And again, that I think is why they knew what was really happening. But I think that is something that his daughter Irina had inherited. And I believe that was, to me, to weave them in was just such a natural thing. They were just part of they were like the core of the group.
Thomas.
Yes.
Did your dad tell you anything specific and important that he wanted you to understand about the war?
Yes, and this is where detail in the book comes into place. Growing up, he hated the fact that Jews were portrayed as a willing lamb to the slaughter. That there was most Hollywood movies, I should say, books, stories, TV shows portrayed the Jews during the Holocaust as weak, kind of following the leader, not very bright, these type of things, with no fight, no punching. He emphasized the point that is not true. Not only did we fight back with such vengeance that during periods of uprisings, for example, during the Warsaw uprising, actually the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, they held the Germans for 30 days. I mean, militarily they ended up losing. But what happened was, during those 30 days, the Germans in the ghettos of Warsaw, Poland, fighting Jews, were held back to the point that Adolf Hitler had to order a full division from the Eastern Front, the Russian front, to come in to reinforce the Germans that are fighting the Jews. Therefore leaving the eastern flank exposed for the Russians. So that, while the uprisings themselves were not militarily victorious with the Germans and the Jews, they had such a profound impact that the eastern flank was exposed, allowing the Russians to continue their march towards Berlin. So that was what we want to portray. That we fought back in ways that is not portrayed in movies, not portrayed in TVs. He talked about when they worked in factories, for example, Germans being very predictable. One of their biggest traits, or one of their biggest traits and also the weaknesses, is they're very predictable. So when they would build rifles, they work in factory making rifles, for example. Well, Germans would inspect every 10th rifle, let's say, for example. Okay? So every 10th rifle, they would make that one the good one. That's the one they would fire. Okay?
They would saw down the firing pin.
Yeah. So all the other ones, they would saw down the firing pin. They would put something in it. They would do something so that when this poor little Nazi was on the front lines against the Americans, or the British, or the Russians, he's going to fire his weapon. It doesn't work. See?
And they would blame the company that produced the metal, not the guys at the gun shop.
Also, he talked about this. They're hand grenades. They're potato masher. They were called potato mashers, big long thing. Well, they had you pull the hand. There's a fuse on hand grenades. Okay, they had about a 10-12 second fuse on them, which is a lot of time, by the way. Okay, 10-12 second fuse to fire it and let it go. Well, again, let's say every 10th hand grenade would be the one that actually had the 10 second fuse. But the other ones have a 3 second fuse. Okay? So there you go, kaboom. So that was their way of fighting back. Where maybe not always one-on-one with gun versus gun, but there was ways in which they carried on their fight, again, not without a fight, into ways the Germans were unexpected.
He hated the Hollywood image of the Jews in the Holocaust. And he described it as sheep gone to the slaughter. And I said, what is it that you would like to have conveyed to the world in this book? He said, I want the world to know that we fought back and we fought well.
So, speaking about this wonderful book, Kirk has just released a glowing review of Not Without a Fight. For the audience who may not know, Kirk has said this. In Duke's tale, written with beavers, the prose is plain and undecorated, by poetic embellishment, but powerful as a result of its straightforwardness. For example, the descriptions of the conditions of Treblinka are unflinching, vivid, and are absent any cloying dramatization. Was that your intent when writing the book?
It was. Some writers, put a lot of what they call poetic embellishment, using a lot of adjectives and I call it contorting sentences. Other writers do not. Ernest Hemingway, for example, did not. George Orwell did not. There's another style of writing where you're straightforward and you just speak plain language, and that's what we tried to do here. When I originally sent the manuscript to the editors, Victoria Wright, who sadly passed away shortly after the book was released, Zachary Brown, another editor, David Kahn, who's a Holocaust historian, also the chief instructor for Israeli Karl Begaw, who assisted with a lot of the fight scenes. They all said the same thing. This book needs to be straightforward. You don't want to take a topic like this and create a lot of flowery language and try to create a book that's not really what it is. It needs to be down to earth. The descriptions need to be straight to the point, and so that's what we did. We kept it that way.
This is just an amazing book, and I just cannot wait for you guys to see it and read it. Well, speaking of seeing it, is there any big plan for making this into a film or television series? It would be awesome.
Well, actually, that's how we designed the book to write. We wanted the book to read like a movie or a miniseries. Each chapter leading into the next one, like an episode, a cliffhanger for the following week's episode. So we have had some contacts, and DW can kind of give more insight on that as well.
Yes, we've had a number of inquiries and some directors who have already expressed an interest. So we do anticipate it'll be happening at some point. Not sure when, but yes.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, we're excited.
Yeah, I would guess. But I mean, it is written in such a way that just everybody would totally just come in every week to see it for sure.
Well, my father was so alive. He said, when we started writing the book, he was so excited. He said, "Oh my God, I'm finally going to be a TV star." he said, I'm going to have paparazzi around me, and we're going to be famous, and that he was excited.
I'd like to introduce a special person, an important family member, and a continuing inspiration to everyone. Joyce McGregor Beavers. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, since you spent 54 years married to Cass, would you like to say something about him?
Well, I met Cass in 1960 at Newark Airport. I was a flight attendant for United Airlines. I grew up in Southern California, in Mission Beach and La Jolla. So going to New Jersey in January was quite a contrast in climate for me. And it was a blizzard. And Cass was picking up some other flight attendants to take them home. And I got a ride. That's how I met him. And I was impressed because he was very outgoing. He had a great sense of humor. And it was a lot of fun to be with. And we eventually started dating. As a matter of fact, our first date, he really tried to impress me because he took me to the Metropolitan Opera. And I'm an opera fan, so that was wonderful. And then we did a lot of traveling because I had airline passes. And Cass was very smart. He could speak 5 languages. Wow. English, Russian, Polish, German, and French, which helped a lot in our travels. And we went to Israel twice because we had family there. His uncle, his father's brother, lived there. And we just had a really nice life. He was a very good family man, and he loved his family, and he loved his children.
Oh, good. I know. We've actually talked quite a bit about this
Right.
stuff because I'm just fascinated. So when did you meet Cass's mother, Irina?
Well, right away, in 1960, he took me introduced. Now, she lived in Queens, New York, and I was very impressed because she was an elegant lady and had a great sense of style. Her apartment was beautiful. She had many antiques and fine art, and we bonded right away because we both liked to go to shows. We went to the Broadway shows together, Carnegie Hall, and we went to the opera again. And as a matter of fact, a family member, Artur Rubinstein, was a famous Polish pianist. And I got to go to his apartment and listen to him practice, and that was marvelous. Oh. It was really nice.
That's wonderful. Oh, you're so lucky to be involved with this family.
Yes, right down my alley.
Yes. So did Irina have a close relationship with her brother Bernard?
Yes, she absolutely adored Bernard, but he was an engineer and a helicopter designer, very brilliant. And then he chose in later years, but she was not happy about. But he was a very good painter, a sculptor. He wrote poetry, he wrote plays, and he was well known for translating the works of Chekhov from Russian into English.
Wow. That's amazing.
Very bright man.
It's amazing. So, Joyce, most importantly, how did you feel about this book?
Well, Cass had talked a lot about his life and his family life in Poland before and during the war years. And after listening to all that, when I first read the first chapter and they're having the conversations around the table, I just felt I was part of the family, just sitting there listening to it. So I was familiar with it right away. I just loved it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you, Joyce, for sharing your knowledge and insights and all that you know about this fascinating surviving family.
And survived they did.
Yes, they did. And thank you for coming to see my first episode of the Dee Giffin Scott Show. I have so much gratitude to be able to do this and do this particular night of Not Without a Fight. What a wonderful way to start a new series. Thank you again. I mean it really from the bottom of my heart. Shalom.
Go ahead.
All right, guess who we have? Our sponsor here, Arlo Guthrie's cousin. Can you give me a high five? All right, Glenn, thank you so much for sponsoring the Dee Giffin Scott Show. Tell me about what you're doing.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. So I, along with Ryan Haggerty from Ryan's Comics, are going to put on the best music show festival that Marietta has ever seen before. Okay? We're going to have bands. We're going to have 80-plus artists, freestyle dance crew competitions, live tattooing, comedy, and much, much more. We're going to have a kids zone where the kids can play video games in an RV. We also are getting sponsorship from Active Skateboardings, and we're going to have a half pipe for the kids as well. So we're going to advocate to all ages. This is going to be something so spectacular that it's going to take off the map for sure.
Wow. It even sounds interesting for me, and as a senior, I mean, you know, it's one of those things I thought about a tattoo, and I went, but, you know.
You never know.
You never know. Well, thank you. Is there more?
Absolutely. It's called the Gem Music and Arts Festival. So stay tuned this summer.
Well, good. Thank you so much for sponsoring my show.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we got to get to this festival, you guys. Sounds like it'd be great fun.
See you there.